and welcome to the Wine Enthusiast Podcast, your serving of drinks culture and the people who drive it. I'm JC Tops, assistant editor here at Wine Enthusiast. This is our fourth and final conversation with the Wine Enthusiast Future 40 Tastemakers. This week, I'm chatting with Katie Melchior. Katie's a French-speaking blogger, influencer, and educator based in Jersey City. She's on a mission to make French wine more accessible, and she's quickly becoming a leading voice in the digital wine world. So listen on as we discuss the term influencer, sustainability in French wine regions, French wine and its approachability, and speaking out for marginalized communities in wine. Hi, I'm JC Tops, assistant editor here at Wine Enthusiast. And today I'm really excited because my guest is Katie Melchior. Katie is one of our Wine Enthusiast Future 40 Tastemakers. She's a blogger, content creator, wine educator, influencer, and she speaks French. Welcome, Katie. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So, when and where does your wine journey start?
I got into wine really only because I got into French. I'm not sure how many other Americans have kind of had a similar experience, but my parents are actually not drinkers at all. You know, they may have had a few cocktail parties here and there in the 70s, but I never grew up with wine on the table or, even any liquor really in the house. But when I studied French and finally went there abroad, I discovered this whole world of French wine and spirits, in addition to French food and all those beautiful things go into a culture. And it really wasn't until I got back from my many times in France, whether traveling or living there, that I actually started work at a French wine marketing agency. And the reason that I was hired for that agency was not just because I had a communications background, but also because they needed someone who spoke French and could speak French with all of their clients who at the time were almost entirely wine and some food as well. And it was largely the wine regions that we know and love today and sort of their professional associations, their trade associations. So it was Loire Valley wines, Vin du Sud-Ouest, Languedoc, the Rhone Valley, Beaujolais, all these beautiful places. And so that's really where my wine journey began, because although I was familiar with French wine, I really had to memorize everything about these clients and, all the wines that they had on shelves and all the different grape varieties they used and the whole culture of French wine. So it was really an immersive wine experience, and it just piqued my interest. And I was like, okay, this is the perfect way for me to use my French and also dive into the world of wine.
That's so exciting. So you actually moved to France. I mean, it was just to learn French, or?
Yeah, so I started learning French when I was 11 in a traditional just American school setting, and I just took it every single year from the time I was 11 until I was 18, and then I went to college first actually for vocal performance. I wanted to be an opera singer, and part of that I had to really specialize in one language, and so I specialized in French. And I spent a year studying abroad in France. And while I was there, I realized that my real passion was not singing and music, but it was actually the French language. So I came back from that study abroad and I, switched my major essentially to French and Francophone studies. And then after college, I lived again in France for a while, teaching English in Western France in Nantes. So yeah, it was, and then I went back there a few times after to do, an internship or two as part of a few different educational programs I was doing. But yes, it was always sort of tied to education at first.
Okay, so you're an influencer, right? I mean,
Yes.
okay. So I don't know why the term is so divisive, especially in the wine world.
Yeah.
But what does being an influencer mean to you?
Yeah, I think the divisiveness of the term, and I'd be curious to see what your thoughts are on this too, but I think initially when people who are not content creators or influencers themselves, when they think of an influencer, they think of someone like a Kim Kardashian, someone who is like a mega celebrity. There's a bit of cachet that comes with that. And then there's also kind of a negative connotation of, oh, lots of like plastic surgery and you aren't who you really are and there's no authenticity and, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely has its weight and there is a place for that. But at the same time, there's so many people like myself who kind of got into it really just to be authentic, and to show like the things you're actually drinking and what does real life look like? And I think that nowadays is much more, I guess, realistic. When I think of an influencer, I think of someone who is a real person, not necessarily a celebrity. And so, someone who just really built an audience around a core passion and shares knowledge and love for whatever that passion or subject is with others. So, I've been grateful and actually kind of shocked that it happened for me. I did not expect to become a quote unquote influencer. I really just started out because in my full-time job, I was asked to do an influencer trip. So coordinate 2 influencers to go to the Loire Valley and meet with clients and producers from all the way from Pays Nantais, Muscadet World, all the way to Sancerre. And so we did this epic road trip from the west to the east of the Loire Valley. And it was an incredible experience. And while I was there, I was doing a lot of French translation and French pronunciation with both of them and the producers. And at the end of it, we were all kind of sitting in this cafe in Paris. And they were like, you should really like get into this. Like, you should just find a way where you can like bring the French specifically, like savoir-faire and the language and everything into the Instagram wine world and help people out, because they were like, it's helpful for us that you kind of did all of this, while we've been here, and it might just be a helpful resource. And I thought, you know what? Maybe they're right. So it took me a long time to kind of come around to the idea. But once I did, I was like, I really just set out to help people pronounce French wines better and understand, France. So that was it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love your blog and I started following you on Instagram and I was like, "Oh, this person's going to help me like speak French and like and sound very like I have no idea." I mean, like I review wines from France and but I totally butcher the names cuz I don't speak French.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I definitely love following you and it makes learning about wine interesting.
Oh, thanks, JC. Yeah, when I got into it, it was initially just to help other influencers. Once I kind of got there and was helping everybody, and again, I was very lucky because I worked with many of the wine influencers in my full-time job at the time. So we already kind of knew each other, and we already had this kind of back and forth community going on. And then they started sharing them with their friends who are sommelier, and that's actually where it was really the wine trade that started to follow me the most and needed my assistance the most, because they're pronouncing those names on a daily basis,
Right. Yeah.
and so that was really a major practical application. And I was like, okay, maybe this is a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. At first I was like, this is kind of silly. Like, does any of this really matter? Is anyone going to care about this? But then when it came down to it, the Somm community is the community that really, came out for me. And, it's become a very, very fun sort of mutual relationship. So yeah, it's been really fun.
Awesome. I really appreciated, during George Floyd in the summer of all of that unrest and riots and everything, that you basically said, you took to your platform as well and you said, this is kind of like, this is part of our everyday life. And you incorporated ways that how you could be helpful or other people could be helpful, to the people of color and what was going on in the world. And that really struck with me.
Oh, well, I have to give credit where credit is due. I think when all of that was happening, myself and a lot of other folks didn't really know what to do and how like we could have a part in any of this. And I think people were very much really before 2020 even, I think people were very like, okay, you're not going to share anything besides like wine and your lifestyle like on Instagram. Like everything else about your life like has to be separate, and your political views and like all of these things. But the reality is that wine has always been kind of political. Whether it's the kings and the crowning of coronation in Champagne, or the nobility or, in the Languedoc, the people who are making it with all the riots and everything, so throughout history and particularly French history, it's just been political. And so it just felt strange to be sitting on the sidelines, and everybody was kind of, it was a very, very intense time for us as Americans. And I actually had a friend of mine who, and I have to shout him out because I think he is someone who is doing incredible things. His name is Mason Washington, and he's the founder of a wine brand now that is called Leyg. I'm going to pronounce it wrong. I always pronounce it wrong when I see him. But he had messaged me and he was like, why aren't you saying anything? Why aren't you speaking up? And I was like, I don't know how to do this. And he, being a young Black man himself, really just kind of said, say anything, just say something. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It just has to be something that's like, okay, you're supportive and we're a whole wine community. And so he really encouraged me to use my voice in this way. And so not only did I kind of start to, obviously support the movement and show support for that, but then from there, I found that there were actually quite a few Black folks who were professionals in the French wine industry, particularly. And I thought, well, this is perfect. This is the best way that I can kind of bring together both of these worlds without just being overtly losing the sense of the page, but then also supporting the folks who need to be supported at this time. And so I did an interview series with a few of them, and it was really eye-opening for me. Even if we didn't talk overtly about like racism in the wine world or racism in general, I just was really inspired by their career paths and the things that they've been doing and any obstacles that they may have faced that I didn't, know about or think about. And so again, it was really just a moment for community. A lot of French brands, especially the bigger ones, kind of came out and took a stand against it as well, which I think was really, really cool to see. Not all of them. There were a lot of brands who, I had reached out to or commented, and they were like, well, we're French, this has nothing to do with us, type thing. So it was definitely, there was certainly a time where it was a bit tense, but I think, overall, it was a really, really important moment to be a part of.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about wine.
Yeah.
What is it about French wine and culture that excites you?
Oh gosh, I think for me, it always goes back to the language. I fell in love with French culture and French wine because I started with the language and I was very impressionable, 11 years old, doing an exploratory block in languages at my middle school at the time. And I just remember like going into that first French class and having my French teacher she really only spoke French for the first 10 minutes. And I was like, in love with her. I was like, I don't know. I'm just obsessed with the way this language sounds. Like, why is it so beautiful to me? I have no idea. But I like wanted to be a part of it. So that was really the first, inkling of it, I think. And then I just kind of followed that all the way through. And, to this day, I still love French food and I still love, French wine. But I think honestly, even just the names of the appellations and the
Mhm.
descriptions, I'm just like, oh my God, that's so beautiful. So I'll just always have a love affair with French because of the language, I think. Yeah.
Okay. So what are your favorite appellations?
Oh gosh. I love Beaujolais Cru. I think I always will. Some of the first, French red wines that I had that I was just immediately smitten with. I really love the Loire Valley as well because of that sort of formative trip that I had that kind of made me French wine tutor. So it has a very, very special place in my heart for that reason. And I also just tend to love more cooler climate wines and sort of the old world style, of course. So really the Loire Valley, Beaujolais really, really are my two favorite regions. And I think the underrated appellations, particularly in the Loire Valley, like Quincy, Reuilly, all of these little ones that are, right next to Sancerre, but haven't quite gotten their due. I kind of love that because it's like, oh, maybe I can still get them for like a really good price, but they're still going to be really, really high quality. So I love when that intersection happens. So
Awesome. Well, I mean, a lot of people aren't familiar with those regions, but they are familiar with like Bordeaux and Burgundy. Do you
yeah.
think that those regions, Bordeaux and Burgundy, are becoming more approachable as time goes on?
Yeah, I think I think they're trying, and I think that that's a major. I mean, I give them kudos for all of that because I think they kind of have had this like climax, like apex of like, okay, we've gotten this reputation of being the most expensive wines in the world, but the reality is that those regions also produce hundreds of thousands of other wines that are much more approachable. And in many cases, that's what the French drink every day. Something that's just a Bordeaux, general regional AOC, a Bordeaux Blanc, even Bordeaux Rosé, Crémant de Bordeaux. So I think Bordeaux in particular is really fascinating to me because I think that they're seeing that people are drinking more and more fine wine, but at the same time, there's just so much to Bordeaux that is not just, those first growths and those second growths. And there's really an everyday drinking wine that's there. And I think you can see it in their marketing communication, export sort of plans, is that they really want to highlight those wines that are really high quality, but affordable, or maybe just a little bit above that sort of like $40 sweet spot that you can get a really, really great wine at that price. And I think Burgundy is trying that as well. I think it's probably a harder sell for Burgundy just because of those yields and just how
Hmm.
much lower those yields are generally speaking. But I would say, places like the Mâconnais, recently, as I'm sure you saw in Puy-Fuissé, where they announced that they were elevating many of those wines to Premier Cru status and all of that. So I think they're trying to like expand really what the idea of Burgundy could be, and that it doesn't just have to be, Vin Romanée and Romanée
Hmm.
Conti and like all of these things, that there's like places within Burgundy where, first of all, you can find incredible value, but that you can also find some like mid-tier, $40 to $60 can get you a really, really fantastic Burgundy for, a really great price. So yeah, I think that they're trying their best to change it, but at the same time, we, particularly in America, I think we just kind of have this understanding of, okay, well, if it comes from France, it must be expensive. It must be the best wine that there possibly is, and that's just not always true. There's just so much great value to be found, and I hope that we are thinking beyond that. And that was also a big part of why I wanted to start the page, because I kept hearing from a lot of my American friends, oh no, like I can't, not only am I confused by France and the labels, but like I can't afford it. And I'm like, that's just not correct. Like
Right,
please let
exactly.
me help
Yeah.
you. Like, let's go to the wine shop. Yeah, it's, and then you get there and you're like, oh, wow, okay, there is a really good bottle, whether it's a red from Provence, which is a fantastic region for red wine as well. So yeah, I hope that it is changing. But I think we have to change our perception as Americans, as much as the regions themselves have to change it.
And now a word from our sponsor. This holiday season, find what you love at Total Wine and More. With so many great bottles to choose from, it's easy to find a new favorite Cabernet or Chardonnay, or the perfect gifts for everyone on your list with some help from our friendly guide. And with all the confidence of knowing you found something special for the lowest price. Love what you find, only at Total Wine and More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Drink responsibly, be 21. I know France is having, well, the wine world, like we're all having conversations about climate change. And I know that there are certain regions that are doing a lot as far as climate change. And I feel like there are certain regions that aren't doing as much. And I know like it's like a whole country. So like, and there's different climates and there's different,
Hmm.
throughout the whole country. So, I mean, are the regions that you're excited about, are they really focused on climate change?
I honestly, I mean, call me biased, but I think France is doing an incredible job combating climate change. And I think the regions that I see that are doing the most are the ones from the South. And it's
Yeah.
because they have so much more at stake in an immediate sort of a time frame. And I think when you look at a place like the Languedoc and you look at Rhone and even Bordeaux, especially Bordeaux, because I think I read somewhere that Bordeaux approved all these new drought resistant and sort of hot weather grape varieties to be planted in
Hmm.
Bordeaux, many of which are Portuguese, which is like,
Yeah.
oh my
Yeah.
God, I cannot imagine like a Saint-Emilion that is planted not with Merlot, but with a Renoa or, one of these other, I mean, it's crazy to think about, but it's like, well, you got to do what you got to do. And that's also true in the Languedoc. I think the experimentation there that I've read about is fantastic. And they have, over, 35% or something crazy like that of all of their vineyards are organic or certified organic. And then you look at a place like, the Rhone also, and they're trying to plant at higher elevations and looking at drought resistant rootstocks and all of these things. So I think the things that are making the news or what I'm reading about is really the immediacy of these more southern regions to really change the way that they're, planting things as well as growing. But I think even in places like Burgundy, where everything has just been like monoculture and it's just like so much about grape growing for such a long period of their history, now we're like reading things and seeing things about how they're trying to bring more biodiversity into the vineyards and they want to, plant more trees and have, farm animals in the area and, really to make it less of a monoculture and make it more like a garden so that they all kind of protect each other and there's like a real ecosystem there. So I think that that's, a really, really cool approach to take as well. But I know that there's also a lot of producers who, have seen the effects of climate change and may not be pro some of the techniques that regions are allowing. So for example, I was in
Hmm.
Alsace in May and April of this year. And at the time, they were going to have a vote as a region to allow for irrigation that year because Alsace is an extremely hot, dry region, which is kind of rare for the north of France, but it's incredibly sunny and has beautiful weather, so it's a great place to visit. But they did end up approving that sort of allowing of irrigation this year. And it was the first time that that's, really been on the table. And when I spoke to the producers about it, none of them were happy about it. They were like, well, I don't want to take water to irrigate my crops that could be used for crops that are like, necessary for life. Things like
Right.
wheat in France and, corn and soy and all these other things that are like necessary to keep humans alive. And so they were like, yes, it might become necessary, but they were all really hopeful that they could combat it in their own ways or in other ways that didn't require the use of irrigation, particularly in Alsace. So I'll be curious to see how that conversation nets out because I know just from my personal experience that many French winemakers are against irrigation for a large number of reasons. But then as we see with what happened with the fires in Bordeaux this year, it's like, okay, well, what are the other options, and will the winemakers and the leaders in these regions really think outside of the box in a way that makes them not only sustainable, but also, finding true solutions that don't take water, for example, from other places that need it. So it'll be interesting to see.
I'm really interested in like champagne because you have so many of the small growers and they're producing organic wines. And it's kind of like, but like, so are these like small growers or are they leading the charge for these, like, all the big houses to say, hey, I guess we need to kind of get on board and start certifying or becoming organic? It
Yeah.
seems, and their climate is really hard, I know.
Yeah, no, I know it's really interesting because I'm hardly an expert in champagne at all, by the way. I'm actually really only just getting into it because I famously have had an aversion to bubbles for most of my wine drinking time. So I'm like slowly like dipping my toes in the
Yeah, I
water.
heard that. I heard you say that on one of your stories. You're like, yeah, I don't really care for champagne.
I love it. I mean, it's an incredible region, but it's just like, I don't know. I've never been like a sparkling anything person. Like, I don't know soda, no sparkling water, nothing. So it's taken me a really long time to get into it. But the more that I'm reading about it, and the more producers that I talk to, I feel like there's producers who are like, no, we couldn't possibly be certified organic in Champagne. Like, do you know what the weather is like? And
Mhm.
then on the other hand, you have, those very small growers, as you mentioned, who are like, well, why can't we do it? It's very much like
Exactly.
putting on your positive pants and saying like, yes, we can do it, no problem. We'll give it a try. And yeah, I think that's a region that's very, very fast changing too.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm really interested in hearing, as the holidays approach. What do you bring to the table for holiday gatherings, like for pairings?
Mm. Pairings. I would say one of my go-tos, especially for Thanksgiving, because Thanksgiving is so hard. You have like all these flavor profiles, and then you have like all of these like crazy desserts, and like there's meat or there's not meat, and then there's just a lot going on at Thanksgiving.
Hmm.
I always try to bring a Bandol rosé. I feel that those sort of darker rosés, especially from Bendel, where just phenomenal quality of rosés coming out of there as always. And honestly, I think they're getting their due now, but for the longest time, they were so overshadowed by Côte de Provence and kind of Provence and the marketing genius that went into all of that. And Bendel's just sitting up on the hill like, hello, don't forget that we make amazing rosés that are just a little bit darker of color. But I always bring those to like a Thanksgiving gathering because they just seem to pair with all kinds of things because they're just a little bit more complex and they can go with different flavor profiles. So I always have something from Bendel on tap. And I also go back to the idea of Beaujolais Cru because those are just major crowd pleasers because they're medium or in some cases fuller bodied. You have like, if you're at a gathering that has, like I'm thinking of my fiance's dad who loves like a bigger, bolder, Cabernet Sauvignon. If I bring him like a Beaujolais Cru, like a Morgon, he's gonna love it because it's not incredibly as full bodied as maybe he's expecting, but at the same time it gives him some sustenance and some substance, and then I can enjoy it too. So it's one of those like
Exactly.
unicorn wines. Yeah, you bring in, you're like, okay, so we can all drink this happily without. So yeah, I always go to those two more or less.
Awesome. One final question. What's in your glass now?
Oh gosh, I should have poured a glass to record this podcast. Maybe it's better that I didn't though. What is in my glass now? I have to be honest, we have like 4 or 5 bottles that have been open in the fridge for a few days because I've been shooting a lot of content. But one of those is an Alsace Pinot Gris from Albert Buchsler, and I was lucky enough to visit him earlier this year. So I do have an Alsace Grand Cru of his that I'm really loving right now. So
Yummy.
yes.
Katie, thank you so much for
Thank you.
the time to chat with us today. It's been so cool, so much fun.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this was wonderful. It's always fun to geek out with French wine. I could chat for another hour, and that's where we're probably like, okay, we gotta stop because this girl, she's gonna keep going.
Okay, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, of course. Thank you, JC.
From learning about her wine journey to discovering her favorite French appellations, I had an amazing time chatting with French blogger, educator, and future 40 tastemaker Katie Melchior. While the Old World region produces phenomenal wine, its culture and the language can definitely be a little bit intimidating. I, for one, am super excited about the bloggers and influencers who are dedicated to making the French wine more approachable. What are your thoughts? If you liked today's episode, we love to read your reviews and hear what you think. And hey, why not tell your wine-loving friends to check us out too? Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. You can also go to winemag.com/podcast for more episodes. I'm JC Tops. Thanks for listening.